I guess they do clean in the kitchen.
I love it. Yay,
I'm,
Carolyn.
I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarlane. And Thursday, I call this the classic group that's assembled to discuss what's on our mind, issues of the day. I'm pleased to welcome my cousin and person I've known for every second of my life. He's a few months older than me, Dean Burnell Venable Powell, former dean at University of South Carolina Law School, former dean at University of Missouri, Kansas City Law School, and just a good guy, good brother, good man. Brenda Lyle is here. Brenda is an educator as well. She lives you're in New
I'm in
Mexico,
Santa
right?
Fe.
Santa Fe, right?
Right.
And is a columnist for Inside News, among other things, an author and a wonderful human being. Kamal J. King is here. Kamal, Brenda Burnell, and I were all in school together in Kansas City. So this is a story that goes back a few years and one that gives me a lot of pleasure. In fact, this idea of doing this really comes from Burnell, Kamal, because Burnell at one point in time, this is maybe in a few years ago, when we all turned 65 years old, he had said, Al, you should write something about the class of 65 turning 65. And didn't do it, but the idea stayed with me, right? And so it may be turning 75 that idea comes, but this is on the way there. And then Ndugu Yusuf Mjini is my friend and colleague, warrior, educator, public servant, just a human being par excellence, a good
My
man.
mentor.
Good afternoon, all.
And
Good afternoon.
always, this group has something wonderful to say. We're expecting Dr. Irma McLaurin as well. I sent a note out saying, let's add 3 or 4 things on my mind. We don't have to stick to those, but just to have us start.
Great set of questions for today's
Was.
program, Al.
You see them?
Yes,
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah,
So-
that's a good idea.
Yeah.
We can be thinking about some of them.
Well, the 4 things I put in there, I believe, I haven't got the list in front of me now, were the Clarence Thomas.
Should Clarence resign?
Should he resign? Yeah, you have the others? You have them there in front of you, Yusuf?
I'm sorry.
You have the list in front of you?
Yeah, should
Yeah, go ahead,
Clarence
share it.
Thomas resign was the first one.
Mm-hmm.
There was also the one about Juicy Smalier, as Dave Chappelle refers to him, and Will Smith. Are those distractions? There was the question of reviewing Kanye's confirmation process in front of the United States Senate. And then what are you reading? Books, films, music you recommend. So we could spend an hour on any of them. I'll have to try and remember to be brief and let you take us off.
Okay, well, let me. Those are good topics. This is a fun way to do this too. Let me start with Burnell. Burnell, since we haven't seen you for a while, you've been moving.
Right.
Good to see you again, man. Oh, by the way, happy birthday to you. Early March.
Thank you.
And Brenda, happy birthday recently, right?
Mine was the 10th.
The
All
10th of
right.
March, right?
Yeah, Bernard always reminded me.
Burnell and Bernard, birthday the 5th. My anniversary, the 10th. So we share that date. So kudos to all of us. And Irma, if she joins us, her birthday is coming up Saturday. She's doing a virtual party, so I'll be attending that.
Well,
Burnell,
let's go Pisces.
Huh? Go Pisces.
Go Pisces.
And when those fish go downstream, get out of our way.
Burnell, I'll start with you, man. What's kind of we were talking before about a meeting you did this morning, another group that you have coffee with, and that was a great conversation. Go ahead and sort of summarize that for the sake of Kamal and Yusuf, and for the listeners and viewers.
Well, I have the good fortune now, and it explains my long absence in part. I'm now living in Columbia, South Carolina, and in Kansas City, Missouri. And so I'm coming to you from Kansas City, Missouri now. And I recently moved into a cooperative apartment, and I began meeting my neighbors and discovered that one of the things that some of the neighbors do is something that I also do in Columbia, technically Lexington, just outside of Columbia. And that is that I get together with a couple of lawyers in Lexington every Friday morning, and we just have coffee and talk about whatever's on our mind. And I discovered in moving here that there are a group of neighbors who do something similar. The group is much larger. It can go anywhere from 4 to 10 people if all of them are gathered. But the idea is just that people ought to get together and they ought to talk and exchange what's on their mind. So today I get a double bonus because I spend a couple of hours talking with them, and now I spend an hour talking with you. It's all the same, and it's all driven by the notion that people ought to talk, that we get better when we know better, and we know better when we have an opportunity to exchange ideas, particularly with people who respect ideas and who have differing backgrounds. So this morning, we talked about quite a few things, but one of the things that we talked about was policing. And I asked the question whether anybody had seen what I think would be called a rant or an excerpt from a speech by a Black police or a sheriff. And I think that he's sort of the favorite of the right wing right now. He sort of replaced that guy who, a Permo or something like that from Arizona.
From Arizona.
Yes. Well, now this guy, and I'm not sure, he may be from Milwaukee, but don't hold me to that. But in any event, he put out a statement which he essentially said young Blacks ought to know better in their encounters with the police. That what has happened is that we've had a breakdown of the family and community values. That what they should understand is that in dealing with the police have a tough job, and they put themselves on the line constantly, and therefore Blacks need to be respectful. They need to listen, follow instructions, and if they do this, that there will be fewer of these encounters, and that it's not difficult to understand. They basically just ought to do what would be expected of any young person. And when I saw that, I really took offense, and I started writing something for the internet, but because of the editing process on Facebook, I ultimately didn't end up posting it. I just kept a copy of what I was attempting to post. But the gist of it was this. He says that the problem is police need to be respected. Police have a difficult job to do, and police this and police that. And my reaction was, the real problem here is we don't have a professional police force in this country. Mm-hmm. We have policemen. We've got 17,000 different police departments. Yeah. We don't have a professional police system. A professional police system would be one that sets standards for itself and measures each of its officers by it, that engages in a commitment to best practices, that we would expect some sort of uniformity in terms of our encounters, whether you are Black, white, or whatever, any place in the country. We would expect police to engage you in the same or similar manner. But when there was a violation of these expectations, the next thing we would expect is that there would be a regulatory system that would be similar in every jurisdiction, and that regulatory system would focus on any complaints that we had, and they would be treated in a particular way, and that there would be a test of the policeman's behavior against that professional standard. And we don't have that. And we're not even close as a nation to moving to that. What we have is in some departments involving some police officers, we can expect professional behavior, but we can't expect it uniformly, and we can't expect that there is any kind of national standard involved. And what I ultimately said was, the police in this country are about where lawyers were in the 1960s. Before Watergate, there was no national standard by which you could expect lawyers to operate. And the legal profession began to work on that. And while I know that the legal profession is not perfect and there's still problems in jurisdiction to jurisdiction, the fact of the matter is that in terms of governing and sanctioning wrongdoing by lawyers in this country, the legal profession does a better, handles that process better than does any professional body in the country and in the world. I'll stop ranting at that point.
Brunel, in your absence, I sent 2 articles to Brenda, Al, and Kamal from the New York Times and the Washington Post. One of them outlined the $3.2 billion in settlements that police departments have paid for police brutality or excessive force over the previous 10 years between 2010 2020. The second article, both of them were investigative pieces, dealt with the after incident reports following the civil unrest after George Floyd's murder. And the second one pointed out that police departments were poorly trained, unprepared, that they treated peaceful protesters the same way that they treated the violent lawbreakers and the anarchists and the troublemakers who blended into the civil protest and began breaking windows and setting fires. And the first one pointed out that a lot of the settlements were repeat settlements by particular officers within law enforcement agencies who repeatedly brutalized civilians, and the local municipality, the city council, the county board, wound up settling these cases out of court rather than having them go to trial and result in excessive jury verdicts. So there's a lot of attention being paid to it. There's an article in the Washington Post today about, it's called Pivot, Police Investigation of Violence Offense Territories, where they identify certain blocks or apartments or grids within communities, and then they focus very heavy policing in those geographic areas. And the case of the murder of Brianna Taylor was one of those incidents because she had an ex-boyfriend who was believed to be a drug trafficker, and they targeted her house because an officer, turns out, was lying, said that her husband was receiving packages through the mail at her apartment. They subsequently wound up firing that police officer because that was the basis for the no-knock warrant that they received when they rammed into her apartment after midnight. But there's a lot of attention being paid right now to policing practices, to whether or not a person in military gear or with a firearm on their hip needs to respond to a medical emergency or a dispute or some type of a mental health or other non-criminal incident that's occurring in someone's home or in the community when the police are called, and what are the appropriate responses. And I think, unfortunately, people took defund the police to mean take all the money away from police departments and disband them and then create some other apparatus in their absence, when what people were talking about was reform the police and reallocate the budgets to address the needs that we have assigned to police officers in terms of responding to medical, mental health, and other nonviolent situations in our community.
Yeah, I think you make excellent points yourself, and I saw that first piece that you mentioned. What strikes me is that when you describe the situation following Brianna Taylor's and make mention of the repeated offenses and things, that's what was going on in the 1960s with lawyers. Lawyers would act in a way that was unethical in one Bronx in New York, and they'd get sanctioned and they would simply move to another Bronx. And what do we see among police officers? They get tagged in one community and they just move to another community, become a police officer there.
Like
And
priests.
Yes, and the other thing that you highlight is that what we should be able to expect of police officers is that they are trained in such a way that it shouldn't make any difference where they are operating in the country. They should be operating consistent with best practices, not in a way that simply reflects how the community does it. And one of the best practices that clearly came into context in the Brianna Taylor situation is no-knock warrants are no longer considered the best practices. Everybody knows that. And they're being pushed out even among the police departments around the country. They're being told, no, this isn't the way we want to go. The Justice Department has already said, no, this is not what we want.
There are two other things to consider, and I want to say this quickly. One is that when they settle those cases out of court, the parties have to agree to no admission of guilt. Okay, number one. Number two, when they settle, the investigation into the conduct of the officers in question ceases. Yeah. And they never reach a conclusion in terms of whether that person acted inappropriately, illegally, or against department policy, because the settlement sets aside the complaint, and the non-admission of guilt means that nobody is at fault. So it's kind of like playing cards with somebody all weekend, and they take all your money, and you get up to go to work Monday morning and all the aces fall out of their sleeves, and they say, look, we know we've been naughty, but from here on in, we're going to play equal. Okay. Yes. No bet to me.
Yeah, I think also that what struck me about the article was the cost and how that cost is passed on to property
to the taxpayers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we know who's being overcharged in terms of property taxes.
Well, look at what's the city in Missouri, Ferguson. You know, what percent of their income for city government was coming from the petty fines that they were assigning to the Black residents of Ferguson, Missouri? 65-70% of their total budget came from the taillight fines and the parking and jaywalking and the other petty fines that they were assigning on the residents every chance they got.
I don't know what the figures were in Ferguson, and so I'll take that statistic as exact, but it's certainly the case that there are too many jurisdictions in this country that are living off of systems that are being funded through petty fines. Sure. And a professional police would not be operating that manner. And that's really what we ought to be calling for. We ought to be calling for police officers to be trained and to operate and to be subject to review in accordance with best standards as applied through objective measures.
Sure. You know, when I was in private practice,
they were operating properly.
I'm gonna throw this in. When I was in private practice, and I would end up in traffic court, it would look like only Black people committed traffic violations. and even the last time I was in traffic court in DeKalb County, it was the same exact thing that I saw back in the early 70s. You would think that only Black people are committing traffic violations. So I think this is systemic, But
you remind me that I said I've been stopped once every 4 years, but last time I was stopped, it was for making a left-hand turn on a red light, and South Carolina allows a right-hand turn on a red light, and in some instances, it will allow a left-hand turn.
If you're on a one-way and going to a one-way.
That's right. Mm-hmm. But I had turned left at an intersection where in a small city like Lexington, you know what the pattern is. And so I knew that 90% of the people driving in Lexington who stopped at that particular intersection when all the traffic was stopped would make the left turn. And I got stopped for doing this. And I said to the person, this is not appropriate. He says, well, we don't have left turns. I said, well, you have left turns just a half mile from here, and there's a stoplight there, and you ought to have a stoplight here because people have been doing this for the last 15 years. And I was so mad, I wrote a letter to the Department of Transportation there in Lexington, complaining that everybody's making a left-hand turn here. You're putting in stop traffic lights in places where this is common. You ought to put one here because this is the most egregious place. And a year later, I still hadn't heard a response. Well, a few months, like 14 or 15 months in, guess what? They changed the traffic light and put in the turn signal that I had been calling for. You think I got an answer to my letter, though? Hell no.
Wow.
Let's shift the conversation a little bit. I'm getting feedback. Are you guys hearing me twice or once?
Just once.
Okay,
I'm happy
okay,
to hear you twice, but I'm only hearing you once.
Okay.
Now,
All right.
I just want to say before you jump off real quick,
Go ahead.
both of my daughters would get stopped because they had Angela Davis afros. So, and they honestly were not doing anything. So they got to the point where they wore wigs when they went to the grocery store.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I mean, 6 times, and I think traffic tickets of more than $400.
Yeah.
When Philando Castile was stopped, the officer who shot him told the dispatch, "I'm going to pull these two men over, because they've got broad noses and they look like burglars."
Oh,
Okay. And then proceeded to tell Philando that he pulled him over because his traffic light didn't work. If you're making a felony stop, you're required to open your door, get on your PA system, and have the occupants of the car get out of the car and either lean and put their hands on the trunk or do something. But he didn't do that. And when Philando told him that he had a concealed permit carry and he was carrying a pistol, the officer said, "Don't reach for that, bang, 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 bang," and shot 7 times. Okay.
Let's pivot from there to the Supreme Court. I wrote this week coming up that in my mind, the proceeding, I may have been too graphic, too aggressive in my analysis, but the proceeding reminded me of Derek Chauvin penning George Floyd, that this was a metaphor. The hearing and the aggressive, I felt, mean-spiritedness, the attack by the 3 Republican members that led the charge against Judge Jackson left me feeling in the pit of my stomach the same way I felt when I looked at the live on television execution of George Floyd. And so let's talk about that. I mean, I may have been over the line in that analysis, but there's something about this sense of entitlement, this sense of we've got a duty to defend against the barbarians. And guess what? We Black people get to be the barbarians. There's a sense that whether, if they could wink and nod at the 500 motorists before you making a left turn, but then when you show up, they feel the need to apply the rules. It doesn't say that the rules don't exist, but they have discretion. And so I have that feeling that characterizes our society in general too often, too many ways, and too often over history. Kamal, what do you think? How let's go back and talk about the hearing and impressions you had, and where do we go from here? And what difference is it going to make? I think a lot, but I want to hear us talk about it. And then, Brenda, you come in next, would you?
Yeah, I believe it was mean-spirited, but I expected the same from Cruz and that guy from Missouri, Cowley or whatever.
Holly.
Yeah, I expected that from them, and it's become almost acceptable, that type of behavior from the Republicans. I was very pleased and proud of the way she responded and kept her poise through it all. But it's almost since Clarence Thomas and I guess it was Bork. I think the Democrats got on Bork and Clarence Thomas. Since those days, I think that it's open season on Supreme Court nominees by the opposite party.
Mm-hmm.
But I was proud of the way she conducted herself and handled herself. And
it backfired on them because the children's book, Anti-Racist Baby, the sales spiked. I wrote that when and Al, I didn't think you were harsh. Mm-hmm. I saw how angry you were. This one hurt. Mm-hmm. You were like Dr. That we had on the Healing Circle. I can't think of her name right now, mm-hmm. but she said it was traumatizing. And when it was right on, even though it was 2 years, George Floyd's still there, but Emmett Till is still there. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. I remember Al and I both wrote about that when our parents didn't want us to look at that Jet magazine. Mm-hmm. And I was determined I wanted to see the picture. Yeah. I think I stayed on punishment for 6 months because I really defied my father. Mm-hmm. But I had to see that, and it's still there. Mm-hmm.
What's your assessment, Yusuf?
I didn't mind the question so much. I think that nominees should face constructive questions. And I, too, thought that she handled herself admirably, and I agree with you 100%, Al. What I resented was the arrogance, the talking over, the insulting, offensive nature of the attacks on her. They didn't care what her response was or what she was attempting to say. Mm-hmm. They just intended to talk over her and to try and dehumanize her and make her look bad. And this woman was endorsed, this judge, by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, by the Rank and File Law Officers International Association, and all of the credentials. She was number one in her class at Harvard and in law school, and the woman's credentials were impeccable. The other damning thing is that she has gone through confirmation hearings 3 times in the last 10 years, and all 3 times, these same parties who attacked her endorsed her and supported her nomination. And now, all of a sudden, they want to come out of right field and attack her on some bogus issues. And I thought the answer that I liked the best was when they challenged her about the school, the Georgetown Day School, whose board she serves on, and the fact that they're teaching inclusive curriculum to small children. And she said that this is a private school, the same as the religious school that Amy Coney Barrett served on its board.
Loved it.
And we don't determine the curriculum. We're the policy governing board of this organization, and so we're responsible for the policies and the governance, not the curriculum. But it was insulting, it was hurtful, it was demeaning, and she really straightened her back and responded with graciousness that her attackers did not deserve. But I think mean-spirited is mild, Brenda. I think it was diabolical. And
demagoguery. Yeah.
Even when Amy Klobuchar and others questioned the beer drinking, the guzzling SCOTUS member who went up before the first seat they stole before Amy Coney Barrett, I thought that people had at least some respect and decorum for the individual and allowed them to provide, their perspective or their side of the issue. It wasn't that, the Democrats had their minds made up and they were just going to besmirch and demean and arrogantly attack those Republican nominees. So insulting and offensive is how I would describe it, and diabolical.
Mm-hmm. And kudos to Amy Klobuchar. She stood her ground on Clarence Thomas. Mm-hmm. Yeah. She was great. So kudos.
Let's go ahead, Brunel.
I know we will want to say something more about Clarence Thomas.
Let's segue into that. You make your comment and segue into Clarence Thomas.
Okay, but well, first I wanted to add a footnote to this discussion, and that is to say that where I still doing academic writing today, I'm trying to get away from it, but where I engaged in that, one of the things that I would be noting is that the three senators of whom we speak, Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, they all represent states that are in some sort of transition. South Carolina is in a demographic transition in which basically what has been a long, stable plantation based political economy is now being challenged because of the migration of people from the country into the Southeast. Ted Cruz is part of that continuing war that has gone on in Texas against Hispanics and people of color, and the division of that state between the haves and the have-nots, and we're going to keep our own and continuing to push that. But he's going to eventually succumb to the demographics too. And the other demographic part of this is Josh Hawley in Missouri. Missouri is a state that where the majority of the people who live in the cities, St. Louis and Kansas City and the suburbs around them, don't have the political power of the state. The state is gerrymandered so that rural interests control the state. And so there's a transition going on there too. And so all of the attack on Ketanji Brown Jackson was largely an attempt to play at the base or play to the base in order to continue this chokehold that these political interests have in their states. And they're all fighting against demographic change and eventually are not going to be able to win it.
So segue to
Clarence Thomas.
Clarence Thomas. You know, I called. She called me back. We missed calls. Ilhan Omar, representing 5th District, but she, from my point of view, was one of the earliest out calling for Clarence Thomas's resignation. And then since that time, I believe a couple of the other senators you've mentioned have called.
Betty McCollum has called for him to resign. 4th District Congresswoman.
And I know that Ocasio has called for his resignation, so that's picking up now. But what are your thoughts, Brunel? And then,
well, I hadn't thought about it before this moment, but Clarence Thomas is part of a transition too. I mean, just think when he went on to the Supreme Court. Remember all the voices that were saying Clarence Thomas was not only the most qualified Black to be on the Supreme Court, he was among the most qualified individuals, regardless of any background, to be on the Supreme Court. Well, now that we've had decades of Clarence Thomas, we get to see Clarence Thomas in his full bloom. And what is that full bloom? Clarence Thomas is part of a cabal of interests that are racist, near fascist, some
originalist,
outwardly fascist, who have been advocating on behalf of these small vested interests in the nation. And Clarence Thomas has never been and has never been accepted as someone who has deep roots in the Black community and who stands in relation to the Black community as the Black community thinks of itself. How do we think of ourselves? We think of ourselves as the conscience of the nation. We are the people who have borne the direct condemnation and pressures and violations of the nation. And we have been the people who from our very day here have been insistent that the nation in terms of its ideals are something else, and that we want the something else we want the ideals. We don't want the day-to-day reality. And what does Clarence Thomas represent for us? He represents an apologist for the day-to-day reality of America, not who Black people are.
Kamal, what you think?
Ditto.
That's what I wanted to say. A master class.
Say ditto. Yeah, just ditto.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was pretty good.
He, he's. Did you guys see the movie Django?
Yes.
The character Stephen, played by one of my favorite actors. Yeah, that's Clarence Thomas. He has his own interests. He's concerned about himself, and that's the way he's behaved. And he wasn't qualified. I think Burnell, you and I agree that he was not qualified to be on the Supreme Court from day one.
Yusuf, take a minute and unpack the news around it. The question of the day is that emails have surfaced from his wife to members of the Trump inner circle. We'll go over, review that. Why
emails,
this is news
text
now.
messages, phone calls, personal appeals.
Keynote
and
speaker.
Jimmy Thomas and Clarence Thomas, husband and wife, are a team. Okay, it's like Siamese twins in one body. And she contacted the president's chief of staff and demanded that the president implement martial law and have the National Guard seize the voting machines in the swing states that Biden won, where the prior president is claiming there was a, stop the steal, that the election was stolen from him. And the president refused the subpoena of the House January 6th committee that's investigating the insurrection of a year ago that's on the U.S. Capitol. And the Supreme Court voted 8-1 that the former president was required to turn over the telephone logs and the other information related to text or posts or tweets or Twitters or whatever on January 6th. There was one Supreme Court justice who voted against the other 8 and voted that the president should not have to turn over that material. Would you like to take a wild guess about who that justice was?
Right.
That said the president shouldn't have to release all of the information about the communication. It was Clarence. Okay.
I'm absolutely stunned.
And the president, Kamal, let me just say this. The president turned over pages and pages of information from the logs, from the phone calls, from the text messages, and there is an 8-hour gap, okay? From 11 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock that night. The president of the United States had absolutely no communication while an insurrection was taking place at the United States Capitol. If you believe the information that was sent over, this, despite the fact that a number of people in his inner circle who have already testified before the January 6th House Committee
They were on the phone.
have acknowledged that they called, that they received calls, that they texted, that they were emailing, that there was communication going back and forth like crazy. And in fact, there was a federal judge this week who said the former president has committed immeasurable felonies. And I've had to recuse myself from this case, but he really needs to be brought to justice. So, the facts don't pass the Clarence Thomas smell test. Okay,
And the question then turns into whether he should recuse himself from any questions that come up with regard to January 6th in that time period, because of the conflict that he has with his wife. And
I'm not able to cite you the U.S. Code provision, but it's available. It essentially says that it is a violation of the law for any federal judge to participate in a matter for whom a family member has an interest.
But Burnell,
and that's a very broad interest.
Do the judicial standards, Burnell, do the judicial standards apply to SCOTUS, to the Supreme Court judges?
This is not a judicial standard. I mean, this is the Congress speaking in terms of stating what would constitute a violation for any member of the
Judiciary.
exercising their authority. This is different from the kind of judicial codes that are passed and been adopted by the courts themselves. The Supreme Court has not adopted a judicial code of ethics for the court. But the fact that the Supreme Court has not adopted a judicial code of ethics for the court, and they should, does not preclude Congress from saying this is the standard that we expect, and it is a violation of the law if any person does this. If any person uses their judicial power, for instance, for purposes of deciding an issue that involves a family member.
We're joined by two other colleagues and friends, leaders in community, Dr. Irma McLaurin, former university president, author, anthropologist, the creator of the Irma McLaurin Black Feminist Archive at UMass at Amherst, and Angela Rose Myers, who is a student, a graduate school student here at University of Minnesota, also an officer and former president, I believe, of the Minneapolis NAACP branch. I'm glad you guys could join. We're having a great conversation. And as always, jump in where you want to. I don't know how much you're able to hear this, Irma and Angela, but we were talking about what the implications are of the consideration about Judge Clarence Thomas. Should he resign? And our guests our group seemed to be saying that clearly there are violations that ought to require either recusing or resigning or him being impeached. I don't know if either of you want to weigh in on that right away, Irma or Angela.
Can I ask a real quick question to
Go ahead, sure.
Burnell? Was anything determined about what went down the toilet in paperwork?
No.
Okay.
That's the short answer. Some of the things that Donald Trump, and I assume that's who you're referring to, that he tore up and would have, and didn't flush, but just tore up, were pieced back together by staff at the National Archive. And so, the Congress has access to a lot of information that Trump never intended they would have, or anybody would have access to. And, intentionally destroying a government document for purposes of some nefarious means would be a crime in and of itself.
That's what I was getting ready to say. Was that a violation?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is Dr. Irma. Happy to see everybody. Always a good conversation.
And we already said happy birthday to you before you got here, Irma.
Thank you.
All
Appreciate that.
Dr. Irma.
This is what 70 looks like.
Looks good.
This is what 75 looks like.
All right.
All right.
Well, I want to speak to this issue of Clarence Thomas and his wife. Clearly, he needs to put a muzzle on her, but she is her own person.
Whoa.
I think it's a very dangerous precedent to start asking for people to resign. We go to these extremes, and the problem with this kind of an approach, which is, extreme, it's either or, and so it's black and white, there's no gray area, is that it can ricochet back on us. What about someone whose politics we agree with, whose wife or spouse says something that advocates a perspective that is much more radical than what is being conveyed at that moment? People will start calling for them to resign. You ask Clarence Thomas to resign because of his wife, shouldn't so-and-so resign? I mean, we should be wary of this because this is what happened with Obama during the election and his minister, that he was being held responsible for what came out of someone else's mouth. Mm-hmm. Clearly, he should recuse himself from anything that is about that particular issue, that it's clear evidence that she had some involvement in or had some position on. He should recuse himself. But I think it's a very dangerous precedent to start asking people to resign.
I agree.
I do not agree. In this instance, I agree with the principle, but I don't agree that it applies to this instance. In this instance, the calls for Clarence Thomas' resignation are not about his wife's position. The call for his resignation is about his failure to differentiate the obligations of his position from his wife's positions. He knows what his wife's positions are. They are very public. And when that comes up and it creates an appearance of possible wrongdoing on the part of the court, he should recuse himself. And it's his failure to recuse himself that is the basis for my call for him to recuse himself. I'm only calling for recusal because I think that recusal, a request for recusal, is the socially acceptable way of sending a signal to him that he should resign. And if he doesn't resign, I think that he should be impeached. Now, do I think that will happen? No. But if I were in the Senate, that's what I would be calling for. Clarence Thomas should be impeached.
Angela, what are your thoughts? What are your feelings?
Yeah, I definitely think that the investigative piece, into this impeachment, Corey, is definitely something that needs to be built out, right? So it's unfortunate that we're in a moment in time when Supreme Court justices, elected officials, presidents, have eroded the trust that the people in our democracy have put into not just them, but into our democracy. And so, ethics and how we perceive and pursue this impeachment, right? It's not just in and of itself, okay, impeach. No, there has to be an investigation. There has to kind of even fledge out this process a little bit more, because even with President Trump, we saw there was a back and forth of, oh, well, how are we going to try to impeach him? Well, let's actually fledge out this process now, because it is, unfortunately, in my opinion, not going to be the only impeachment position. It's not going to be the only impeachment going forward. And with the polarization of our country, like, this probably is a moment where we need to really set down what our ethics are. And unfortunately, I just came from a press conference in City Hall about the 1,300 ethics complaints against the mayor of Minneapolis that were by the ethics board dismissed after 18 minutes of deliberation. And then the result of the Amir Locke murder. And so, this is one of those questions, again, that we have to do for not just accountability of one person, but the accountability of our government and of our systems. These are the points that we need to really dig in on, particularly as our country is becoming more polarized.
Anybody jump in?
If you don't have enforcement behind your standards, then you really don't have standards. You simply have propaganda, talking points, some protocols for social interaction. We can do better than that.
So Brunel,
even though I do not think that it is politically possible to achieve an impeachment, I cannot back away from saying that's where we should be going. And the impeachment process is a process of investigation, the laying of charges, and then a vote.
How do you characterize, Brunel, the president signing the Emmett Till legislation? How does that stack up? Symbolic only, or is there some value? You raised the question of whether there is enforcement behind policies. How does this
good question
get looked at? Should we look at it?
I think that it's always a good thing to align one's actions with one's declared values. And the fact that it took over 100 years to get this done, because the first call for a lynching, an anti-lynching law came well before Emmett Till.
It's been voted down 200 times.
There you go. And so whenever we reach a point in which we can take affirmative action to clearly take a stance that is consistent with the values that we've been stating, I'm all in favor of it. But we cannot lull ourselves into believing that in many instances that means that the action will only be symbolic. And I'm glad to have the symbol as opposed to living in a country where that was never possible, but it's way too late.
Irma and Angela, let me ask you, and then you, Seth, jump in. Are we, as a country and as the world, I guess, as media consumers, spending too much time on the slap heard around the world, they're calling it, right? And on Jussie Smollett? Those things are requiring a lot of bandwidth. What's the reason for it? What do you think about it? What should we be talking about?
Can I say something? Can I say something first?
Sure.
Will Smith was wrong on all accounts.
Okay.
You know, he should have been arrested. I think if he'd have hit Seinfeld, he would have been arrested. Mm-hmm. And I think it symbolizes so much black on black crime. It's horrible.
You know, there is an aphorism that says our collective flaws are collective as Black people. But when we do great things, it's always the individual. And I think what happens is that the media is desperate to try and get, viewers. There are so many public platforms, Medium, where people can get news, the Lincoln Project, that media is just going to focus on the negative, especially when it comes to Black people. We have to understand, and I want to see what Brunel said, which is that we're in a moment where democracy is under attack. This is not just about individual bills, but the whole notion of democracy, as imperfect as it has been historically, is under attack. People are bringing their religious views, so we no longer have a separation between church and state. All of this is creating an atmosphere where people react rather than think and act. Now, I've met Will Smith. I think he's an amazing person. His wife and he have done stuff that never got the bandwidth. They've been going around to schools years and teaching young Black kids about the entertainment business under the radar, not asking for big publicity. They have a foundation where he said, my grandmama always told me, if you want something, then you pay for it themselves. So they've been supporting things out of their pocket. They don't get that kind of visibility. I do not agree with his action, but one act does not erase the good that he's done. And we have got to stop moving in that direction, that one thing suddenly makes him persona non gratis. What he did in that moment was not appropriate. No question about it. Not something we're trying to teach kids how to handle, when someone comes back then, this whole notion of disrespect and all of that, that has been promulgated by, gangster rap. You just take something and you bang somebody. We've got to get away from that because we are dying. We're not only dying by the police, we're dying by our own hands, and this kind of action is totally inappropriate. However, he also has called to task the Oscar awards community. They started that trend, So White Oscars, and nobody was paying attention to the ways in which Black actors were not, in fact, getting recognized for the great work they did. And when they did get recognition, it wasn't, Halle Berry should never have won that award for the Monster Ball. She's done so many other things that were so much better.
True.
So that's true. I'm just saying,
our Denzel.
The one that was egregious was Life Sure Is Hard on Us Pimps. That won the album of the year.
Look at what Hollywood is saying. We're going to reward you for doing. Even Denzel Washington, the award that Denzel got for Training Day. So I think we have to stop participating in that. I think we have a comment. We say, Will, you were wrong, and we move on. But we also say it does not erase all the good that he has done. It does not erase his acting ability in the same way that white actors get away with child molestation, incest, all kinds of stuff, and no one wants to erase
Dr.
their whole
McFarlane,
career.
how does that fit in with Bill Cosby?
Well, I think, I'm not promoting what he did, but I think you have to look at the disparate way in which the media targeted him in a way that it did not target, who was the guy, Seventh Heaven, who was caught on tape, talking about having relations with young girls, not even adult women, right? And nothing happened to him. They kind of moved him out of the way. And then you look, and his reruns are back online. So they give it a rest, and then it comes back on, and everybody forgets about the bad that white.
Yeah, but Bill Cosby had about 58 women lined up to testify, and that's more than a coincidence. Okay,
Absolutely,
that's a common denominator.
But Dr. Irma, I need to ask you a question, and it comes up in interviews a lot. We can't do what they do.
That's what our mamas taught us.
That's what Mom said.
Well, there are people who are saying that they went after Bill Cosby not because of the preponderance of numbers. I mean, let's look at the guy who, Harvey, what's his name?
Weinstein.
The preponderance of
Weinstein,
numbers there, and how long it took them to figure this out. This has been going on. Everybody knew it was going on. But apparently Bill Cosby was trying to also buy a TV station. And, the story is that this is a way of letting him know what I call the OJ syndrome. Oh, you think you white like us? We gonna show you. That's not how you roll, right? Yeah. So we have to look at these things in context. That does not in any way say that I am excusing Bill Cosby or in any way, rationalizing what he did. Violence against women in any form. Okay, we need to move past that, and we need in our own communities to think about what are we teaching our sons, because men are as much a product of socialization as women are. So it's not just because I have a son. So it's not just about what I say to my daughter. It's also what am I teaching my son, right?
And that's why I think that Will should have been ostracized for that. I mean, I couldn't believe the next morning when I saw people supporting that, saying that he stood up for this woman, for his wife. No. That to me, it just showed all kind of bad things.
And what do you think?
I'm trying to think of the actor who was paired with Danny Glover in Lethal Weapon.
Mel Gibson.
Mel Gibson. Oh yes. I haven't seen
about Jews.
I think the reason I couldn't think of his name is that I haven't seen a Mel Gibson anything in so long. And the reason why is that I decided Mel Gibson was not the kind of person who I wanted to support or have anything to do with it. The conduct here of Will Smith doesn't reach that category, but I think it deserves the same kind of consideration as with Bill Cosby. When people do things that are wrong, we ought to simply say they're wrong and not make any qualifications about it, any qualification whatsoever.
And I don't disagree with that. I think the question becomes, after someone does a wrong, is there any way to come back? Right. We talk about having people from prison. Okay, we're willing to forgive murderers. We're willing to forgive all these folks. But suddenly, our forgiveness doesn't extend. So I think we just have to be consistent, give the critique, absolutely make sure your kids know that was wrong. But at the same time, now's the question is he able to now reclaim himself? Can he try and make up for that ill that he did? And let's see what he does. The story's coming out on that.
In law, we've tried to deal with this question of rehabilitation. And the basic principle is everybody has an opportunity to rehabilitate themselves, but it takes time to rehabilitate yourself. And you ought to have time in order to demonstrate that over a period of days and weeks and years, you've reestablished yourself in a way that addresses the egregiousness of the wrong.
Yeah, one old damn
chance to do that with Will Smith in 24 hours. He
Yeah.
can come back. He should come back.
Right.
What he did was not the equivalent of Harvey Weinstein. Yeah.
Or Bill Cosby.
So,
Yeah.
or Bill Cosby. So
Right.
he will be back. And I think that he should have an opportunity to do that. But I make no apologies or defense for him. And I don't think that it's even necessary. I was happy to see that he came out with an apology. I wish he had made it immediately, but I was happy to see that he came out with an apology, and it seemed to be a real apology. He's doing what's necessary to come back.
Yeah, one old damn wipes out 100 attaboys.
Yeah.
We're at the end of our time. Let me ask each of you to take a minute to say what you're reading right now. What you're reading, what you're listening to, what you're watching, TV, video, documentaries.
I'm rereading The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray. And I've watched the movie, and I had to go back and read the book. I read the book 10 years ago, but it's well worth reading. And I think it's the guy's best acting performance.
Who's the author of the book? I know it.
Walter Mosley wrote it. The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray.
Right. And that
With a P.
was in the media recently, right? For some reason. What was the reason?
Because it's coming out on the movie.
On the movie? Okay. Angela, what you reading? What you thinking about?
I'm reading Ethical Ambition by Derek Bell. I have it here. And then I'm also reading the 1942 Supreme Court decision on Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire. That's on fighting words in the fighting word doctrine. So that, there are some words that are held to be so insulting and so, their very utterance can inflict injury or tend to incite an immediate breach of peace, that, they are among this class that's not protected under free speech, and it is seen as instigating a fight. And so if you were to fight back or end that fight, with an open-handed justice, that is something to note. And our kids in our schools also should note that, sometimes you can't be too hard on yourself. You can take the consequences of your actions and move on in the face of, someone spewing some fighting words at you.
Irma, what's on your mind? What are you reading and thinking about?
Well, I've been watching a film. I'm getting ready to do a film review by a young sister called Unheard Voices, Black Women in the Civil Rights Movement, looking at the gender politics of that. So I've kind of been focused on that. And there's another book by two Black women that they published about 10, 15 years ago. And it's the different ways that Black professional women sort of, navigate their way through the world. So I'm going to be reading that and doing a review for it. They just updated it. It just got republished. And so I think part of it is that, I'm looking at old things and new things and just following all the discussions. There's discussions on Twitter and, all kinds of things, but just trying to stay in the moment and getting ready to travel to Zimbabwe and South Africa. Yes.
Wow.
Kamal lived in West Africa for a bit of a time, so he's a good contact for you there. I don't know if you traveled to South Africa or not.
Yeah, I have.
Over there, so you might know some people, so you guys should connect. That'll be great. Yusuf, what are you? Oh, one thing that you and I talked about briefly that I'd like for us to discuss in the future, and it's coming out of what I'm reading. I just reread the last chapter of what is it called?
Is that Ikweyama?
Yeah, I've been just devouring him with this one, Wat and Shemsh. And the last chapter talks about myth, history, philosophy, and literature, the African record, and talks about how we rediscover systems, ways of doing things that come out of our own mythology that can inform our present, but put us on a path where our understanding of creation is the driving force, not the understanding of systems and other voices or people around us whose analysis, if we accept it, always places us at the bottom. So that's the crunch there. But one thing he talks about is a system called the way of Ma'at, or the Ma'at sisters in Kemetic tradition in ancient Egyptian literature. And the Ma'at sisters were mythological characters who were responsible for developing agriculture, for developing, husbandry, working with animals and nature and science and improving it over thousands of years. The book also talks about the departure of that as the standard for organizing humanity, coming out of the Nile Valley in particular, to the switch from that to the emergence of a thought of personal violence, organized violence, and kingship, royalty, dynasty as a strategy for organizing that was more efficient, that allowed and depended on the acceptance of the idea of minority in power and the majority out of power, powerless. So at some point in time, I'd like for us to talk about the question of strategies for creating systems that acknowledge and develop and support universal consciousness, awareness. That may be a dream, it may be utopian, but it's an idea. So I'll stop there. Yusuf, what you reading, man?
I'm slowly working my way through Eddie Glaude. Is it Nation Time? Essays on Black Power and Black Nationalism. And I'm listening to a new radio station on the internet that comes live from the Summit University area of the capital city of Minnesota. It's called the Twin Cities Radio Network. And I'd encourage folks to Google it and give a lesson. A young brother named Wesley Smooth started it, and it's got very nice music. A lot of Black artists are featured, and it's good for whatever you're doing, reading, background, entertaining, what have you. So Twin Cities Radio Network, Wesley Smooth.
Hey, Brenda, what you reading?
I introduced Yusuf to my favorite book. It's Five Smooth Stones by Anne Fairbairn. Yeah. And it goes all the way back. She was a white woman from Monterey, California. She was with a brother, 1968. He was a musician, and she wrote this book, and it's unbelievable. Motown picked it up and didn't do anything with the rights, and then Oprah picked it up. And then they finally decided that it was so intense that it could not be a movie. It should be a series on television. But Kamal, you remember the book?
Yeah, Five Smooth Stones. That's
unbelievable book. Yeah. So anyway, I told Yusuf, I said, it's probably a girly wife book while the husbands are doing all of the antiquity and whatever. But it is a wonderful romance. Dr. Irma, that would be a good one for you on the plane.
Well, better read The Long Dream by Richard Wright if you like love stories.
This is more than a love story, though. Okay. Yeah, it is intense. And of course,
so is Richard
main
Wright.
Character is David. His name.
Brenda, can you put the name in the chat again?
I don't know how to do the chat. I'm always behind. I'll email you. I'm always behind stage.
So we know what you're reading.
And I love this today. Thank you.
Since I've been moving around, I lost connection with some of my books, and happily I've been able to reunite with one that I had started reading, and that's Heather McGhee's The Sum of Us. And she's an economist, and she talks basically about the price economically that the nation has had to endure as a result of its racism, and a wonderful, easy, enjoyable read. And the second thing that I'm reading is South to America, Amani Perry, in which I've not had a chance to really dig into it, but I heard her being interviewed, and she basically takes a trip to major geographic locations in the South and ties them into American political, cultural history. And in order to demonstrate how the South has really influenced the values of the nation.
Okay. Kamal, did you start? You started, right, Kamal, or not? Did you?
Yeah, I started. I told you
Yeah.
about Walter Mosley
Great. That's
and
right. That's
Samuel
right.
L. Jackson.
Quick question, Brunel, who's the painting behind you? That's a nice piece.
It's a pal.
Brenda Lau gets the gold star. That is a Powell. That is my brother Lonnie Powell's piece. Let me see if I can lean out of the way.
It's beautiful. It's showing up. It shows up nicely.
It's it is one of my favorite pieces by him. I always get the title wrong, so I'm not going to try to identify it, but maybe on a later show I'll give him full credit on that.
And Dr. McLaren, I'm gonna send you a couple of names too.
I did it. I couldn't believe I did it. I'm not a techie.
Just over my shoulder, Brunel, is a photograph. I'm sure you have this one too.
Oh yes,
But that's
the
me
family
and,
photograph.
Me and you at your house, at the Powell house, the big house we called it, on 28th in Brooklyn. And you and I and your twin Bernard, I think we are either 4 years old or 5 at that time. Do you remember?
I don't remember taking the photograph, but I do remember the photograph, and I have it too. I think probably nearly everyone in the family has that photograph.
Sure. And I keep talking about it because our great-great-grandmother was in the photograph. Yes. And if my math served me correctly, she was born enslaved, born the property of other human beings. So to me, it just keeps me grounded and reminded and remembering that we're not that far from that human terror, horror of bondage and slavery. And we are in the retentions of it, the things that grew out of it. That is our fight, that is our challenge, and our path, our role was then and still must be freedom. And how that we must define it, live it, execute it, and believe that in doing so, we change the world for the better for all humanity. Listen, thank you also very much. Great conversation. What a wonderful.
Thank you, Lou.
Okay.
Great to join you.
We'll see you. Take care.
Pleasure, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Happy birthday, Pisces.
No, Aries.
Okay.
Even better.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Yep.